Last year, I ran a short series called Fantasy Fight Club, which was a version of PvP rules built around 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. This year, I wanted to revise those rules, make them a bit more balanced, perhaps, and then run some tournaments. So let's talk about how these rules work and how you can get involved. Hey fellow Game Masters, welcome to the RPG Daily, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. Today I'm stepping out of the official Dungeons & Dragons stuff and really looking at a concept that I came up on my own, and I wanted to share with people, and I'm looking at this year as a year to develop it even more, add some balancing fixes to it, and try to come up with something really fun and exciting for the community to participate in. This is called Fantasy Fight Club. If you look here, I will link the series of Fantasy Fight Club Fight, which was just a 3-episode kind of thing I did. Nothing too crazy. But when I look back at that, I want to now look into things that I think I could have done better, what worked, what didn't work, and what my future plans for that series are. So let's dive into it. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, understand that I'm not a super tactical player. I sometimes think that throwing a fireball at the party is the most effective tactic in pretty much any given situations. But in spite of that, I still wanted to come up with something that could be a fun, competitive version of Dungeons & Dragons. Now, let's get into the concept and the basic rules that I had already come up with. First up, I did not want this to be a brawl. I've seen plenty of PvP brawl games go on where it's the entire party fighting all of each other at the same time. I wanted to have something that was actually balanced for 1v1. So the rules setup went like this. The players would first meet up and have a roll-off to decide who got to choose a class first. That player would get to pick a class, then their opponent got to pick a different class. Then at that same time, they were given a budget in terms of gold. The gold they could spend to buy items. Now, they would not get any starting gear while building their characters, they just had to buy whatever they wanted with the gold. For the prices of the gold, I used the Sane Magic Item Price list that is published online. I'll have a link in the description. But some creators came up and they looked at all the magic items and they came up with prices for each of them, and they get pretty high. So the gold number that I gave my players originally was pretty high. I think I had given them 5,000 gold was their number. So they could then spend that on magic items, mundane items, ammo. They would have to keep track of everything and pick and choose what they wanted to spend it on. Some items were an upgrade. For example, if you wanted a +1 sword or a +2 sword, you would have to buy the sword as a mundane item and then buy the upgrade to a +1 or +2. That would cost substantially more than just the sword itself, so that is where I felt there would be some balance. Once they had their character classes picked out and they had their budget, they would go off for 24 hours to make their character. The next day we would meet up for the actual fight. During the fight, they would present their characters. We would talk about it. We did a video going over everyone's character that participated, which was great. But then in the actual fight, each round would start with an initiative roll. So there would not be one initiative and then one person is always leading the fight. The system that I used, which was Foundry Virtual Tabletop, would re-roll the initiative every single round automatically. In addition, the arena had some obstacles that would come into play. In the show we did, it was a lava arena that was supposed to be sinking. So that would activate on the 20 initiative number, wherever that landed in the order that they had rolled. The fight would go on like regular D&D combat, round after round, rolling initiative, and then after 10 rounds there would be a time for a short rest, or essentially a time for the players to spend some hit die to regain some health, and then they would go back at it. I also had a stipulation in the rules when they were buying their items that they could only have 3 consumables. These are spells, potions, beads even. Those kind of things would only be limited to 3. So everything else they spent would have to be something that was a more permanent nature if they wanted to have it. This is also so someone couldn't just buy a whole bunch of potions of healing and then just drink them all during the fight and wait until the other person died. So that is the basic idea behind Fantasy Fight Club. Very simple rules that I thought they were simple, at least. There were some pros, there were some cons to the system, and there were some things that I looked to improve on in the future. So first, a couple of the pros. It was a lot of fun to run that game. It was really neat to see the players competing against each other. The players felt nervous before the fight, and during the fight they felt the intensity of the battle, which was really important and really fun. Another pro, I thought the buying of magic items was on track to what I wanted it to be, if it wasn't a little in need of some balancing tweaks. and an adjustment in the list of items. The complications that came from the arena worked really well when I remembered to do them. Sometimes I would get so engrossed in the fight that I would forget that the arena would have to roll a dice to see what would come up. So when I can remember that it is the arena's turn in combat, then that's great. And I think what might come from that might be a way to add that into the system, so I would get a reminder that it's the arena's turn. Overall, with all the options already built into Dungeons & Dragons, I think there's a lot of space to make this much more complicated, but still find a nice balance between the different classes and the races. I think the idea of seeing two players who have thought out a build very intently and deliberately playing against each other in a timed manner that makes it quick and moves along very fast can be something very exciting to watch. But there are some cons to this system that I did discover while running it. The first up is, as a DM and the players, we are flawed. We aren't always perfect in our systems. So it would take a little extra effort on the account of the DM running the scenario and the players playing it to keep track of every little thing they have going on with their character. In our fight, we had a couple moments where the monk who had Sentinel as a feat forgot that they had their reaction available to them again, and they would be able to use an opportunity attack against their enemy, stunning them potentially, but they forgot that their reaction had reset. I, the DM, also forgot, but I also felt like it wasn't my place to remind them that their reaction resets. So that brings up this inherent dependency on the skill of the players. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a great thing either. I think it is what it is, and there might be a way to fix it, there might be a way to even that out, but at the current time, I don't have an idea. At the same time, you could argue that most war games rely heavily on the skill of the players, as opposed to the build of the army that they've constructed, so it makes sense that this format depends on that as well. Another downside of this is the classes in Dungeons & Dragons aren't exactly balanced equally. A lot of times we see that there is this steep ramp, the steep curve of power from spellcasters that tend to get much more powerful than the martial classes do at the higher levels. Or you can see that the martial classes might be a little more powerful at the lower levels. I don't know if it balances out yet, but that's also part of this system, is I want to figure out if in the right hands can these classes balance each other out. Another con I found is the races. So when they are picking their characters, they don't choose a race and a class up front, they just pick a class. In this case, we ended up with an Aarakocra Ranger, which has flying speed and things like that, versus a monk who could run up walls and stuff, but there was still this level of imbalance as the Aarakocra could fly around. And the last con is that ideally, the ultimate goal is that there is no need for a dungeon master to adjudicate the rules. There is no need for a third party to be involved, as the players can judge for themselves and participate just against each other, and there is no extra hand involved in the game. But as it is right now, it still feels like a DM needs to be involved in the fight. So what are the next steps for Fantasy Fight Club? We have some alterations to do, and we need people to play it and join in the fun, and we need to prepare for the first tournament. So the first thing I'm going to be doing in the next weeks is creating a new list of prices. The Sane Magic item prices are great, but they're really high. They just have extra zeros that can come off. I think decreasing the cost of an item by a decimal or two might work, but it also might not, depending on the lower level, lower cost items. It really has to be something I have to look at, because I would like to not have to count into the thousands for the gold value. I would like to maybe go into the hundreds or even the tens of digits would be nice, but going to the thousands is a lot of numbers to keep track of. The next thing I'm looking at doing is potentially banning some races. I might approach the first official tournament saying you are just using the base player handbook races instead of including monstrous races or elemental races and these other things that are in there. But there are definitely some races that are imbalanced. The Aarakocra is one of them. Having flying speed at that very beginning is pretty difficult. And I know that it's banned in Adventurers League. They don't let you pick an Aarakocra and have flying at that first level. So there are some stipulations that I have to look at in the races. I also don't want to give up the original race formulas and just say it is all custom lineage, just because I feel like the custom lineage works out well for the actual game, but I feel like in this, the racial traits and the diversity between the different races can make for an actual real choice that the players have to make, where if it's custom lineage, then they just say, oh, well, I just put the skills and the things I want and call it good. And there's no real risk-reward situation there. Speaking of bannings, I might have to ban certain magical items. I haven't found one that I said this one is way overpowered yet, because it is based on what the players want to spend. If the player wants to spend all of their gold on one big magic item and ignore the other lower end things that they might need to keep them alive, then that's the player's choice. But I do have to look at magic items and see if there's any that are potentially game-breaking for the players. A big part of this, and why I'm using the same magic item prices, is because the really higher end stuff is that much more expensive, and the budget that is given to the players is already limiting their options in that sense. In the exhibition match, the players had a 5,000 gold budget. There are tons of items on that magic item list that are way more expensive than 5,000 gold, so the players did not have access to those things automatically. I think the most expensive item used in that was, I believe, the Oath Bow, and that player chose to just focus on that and spend less money in other places that they could have spent the money. The other side of it is, in the original, I was allowing the players to roll with real dice. I think a digital dice roller, once set up in Foundry, Virtual Tabletop, or whatever system I use, once that's set up properly, the digital dice roller would smooth things over and make things go much faster, giving us more instant results rather than having to wait for the players to do math. It's not about taking away the fun of rolling the dice, but it is about creating an intense, fast-paced game, and that's kind of was the goal behind it. So I think in the next one, there would probably be a rule that you have to use the digital rollers. All of this, of course, means I need more playtests. So I'm going to be setting up a form. The link is in the description. You can go sign up to join in the Fantasy Fight Club. Here's the stipulation. I'm going to say it here, and it will be at the top of the form. You need to be over 18 to participate. Not because the game is bad or anything like that. It is really just a legal issue of me not wanting to put minors on my channel, or not have to deal with parents when it comes to putting minors on the channel. I don't want to do it. So please be 18, at least if you're going to be signing up. Second, it would be assumed that you have a camera and a microphone and some headphones in order to participate. This is so we can see the participant in the fight. We can hear you clearly using your microphone, and you can hear us clearly with headphones, as opposed to using computer speakers that can get muffled or can create feedback loops in the calls. So there's a couple things there that will be stipulated in the top of the form. But if you want to participate and you want to try your chops in a PvP match, go ahead and sign up in the form in the link in the description, and we'll get some things figured out. The goal would be to do 1 or 2 more exhibition streams of the fights and then go right into a tournament. I'm debating between doing a 16-player or an 8-player tournament. 16 I think would be a more exhilarating tournament, but it's also a lot more people that need to be involved, or 8 players would just be smaller. Anyways, that is Fantasy Fight Club update. I've been Richard. Thanks for watching.